this story is it's super interesting. I mean, we used to talk a lot more about the education reform movement on this program. And for a myriad of reasons, we don't talk about it as much, in part because in many respects, they've lost. I mean, there's still some semblances, but the major battles, it seems to me, at least in fending off the implications of this corporate reform movement, have been largely won. I mean, there's still vestigial impact, and I think that is problematic. And we still have all the same problems we had with education in this country that existed before. And I will address what those problems are in a moment. But a study released about a week ago on the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation multi-million-dollar, multi-year effort aimed at making teachers more effective showed that those efforts, I've seen figures anywhere from $600 to $700 million. The report that they commissioned, it's like a 500-page report by the Rand Corporation, showed that it didn't work. Didn't work at all. According to them, bad teachers were the problem. Good teachers were the solution. The idea and the research it drew on impacted policy across the country. So, value-added assessments. You saw using the high-stakes testing. I mean, on and on and on. It was $700 million poured into, I think it was like 4 school districts and a few charter schools. And it showed that it just didn't work. 4 charter networks, 3 districts. And it simply did not work. And the author of the study, this is paid for, again, by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, said this in Education Week. This suggests that focusing on teacher effectiveness alone is not likely to be the potent sort of intervention that really moves the needle on student outcomes. This is super important, folks. This is Brian Stetcher, who is the lead author of the Gates Foundation report. He added that maybe factors like early childhood education, family support, and child nutrition also need to be addressed to make a significant impact on student performance. This is what folks who are educators and have studied this stuff for years have been saying over and over again. The quality of outcomes, educational outcomes, is largely a function of the inputs. If kids show up on a daily basis and they are not getting good nutrition, they're not in a home environment that is supportive, if they are in low-income situations at home, they don't do as well in school. If they show up to school at the beginning of their careers and they're from low-income homes, they are far more likely, and there's some controversy over the size of the deficit, but they are far more likely to have enormous listening vocabulary deficits and speaking vocabulary deficits. So if I have had the means, and in New York City at the very least, some of this is mitigated by universal pre-K. But if I have had the means to send my kid to pre-K, to send my kid to preschool, to have the means to have my kid take Mommy and Me classes, and just be subject to stimulation, to new experiences. If I have the ability to take my kid to California or to the Grand Canyon or to the country, they automatically are exposed to more words and more concepts that make their brains stretch. I mean, little kids are like animals. And I happened to see 2 different sea lion exhibits this weekend.
Ooh.
Yes. And they train these sea lions as a way of making sure that they are mentally and physically, and it's just, with little kids, their brains are so elastic that all of these things affect the input. If you want to know what the output of a school is, most educators will tell you all you need to know is what is the median income in that district. And they can tell you what the outcomes of the schools are.
Got to keep tossing them that fish.
Exactly. And so hopefully the Gates Foundation will convene more educators who don't necessarily stand to profit off of their next set of reforms, and actually listen to these educators and just simply get the idea that, like, really, if you really want to help educational outcomes, what you need to do is advocate for a broader welfare state. I mean, honestly, like, I think if they poured $600 million into those districts, and that they put all that money into the schools, and they instead put it towards candidates who are running on platforms that would have expanded services for folks living in low-income situations, and funding these schools to be more supportive of kids who need it, that the outcomes would have been better.
Yeah, well, it's a very neoliberal idea, right? The idea that education will fix everything and everyone just needs to like study hard and get a better job and earn more money, rather than the idea that, you know, we need to go right to the source and, you know, get better social programs and a better social safety net.
Well, the biggest neoliberal component of it was the way that they reduced teaching down to the one thing that you could measure, right? Which is sort of like scores that they got, basically these high stakes teaching. And it completely misses the obstacles to people getting a better education, which is they got to have a better life.
Yeah. And like, okay, when you say it didn't work, like, no, it didn't work to improve outcomes for students, but it did work to spread neoliberalism, break teachers' unions, and privatize public education.
Definitely.
And I just have to wonder, like, were Bill and Melinda Gates, like, were these folks acting in good faith at all? Because I feel like somebody greatly misled them along the way.
I think my guess is, yes, they were acting in good faith. But I think the problem is that when you're that wealthy, you don't have the ability to acknowledge that I may not be an expert in this. And I may not even be an expert in bringing in people who I think are experts in assessing whether or not they actually know what they're talking about. Because everybody who came in and guided these folks, to a large extent, right, had an investment in the outcome of what the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation did, and it necessarily benefited them. They need to bring in, if you're going to give that kind of money, I think like you need to just spread it around more. You can't, the arrogance involved here, and they can both be incredibly arrogant, incredibly myopic, and incredibly tied to one way in which to make these determinations and assessments, and still have had good faith. But I think it's highly problematic, and good for schools that rejected this to the extent that they could. I mean, but
it's almost as if going through a democratic process for these sorts of initiatives would be better than just having a billionaire follow his sort of like hunches.
It's almost like yes, you're almost right about that. If you took out the profit motive that was involved and the comfortability that people had in the profit motive who were pouring that money in there. Because, it would have been all, look, no harm, no foul if the injection of that kind of money into the system didn't have ripple effects everywhere else. right? So they wasted $700 million of their money. That's what they want to do. You know, I mean, if I had the opportunity, I would be imposing confiscatory taxing on them so that it wouldn't be their money, but it's their money. And so they want to waste it. That's all well and good. But the impact of what they did was horrific in many respects.
Yeah, well, at least they admitted it. No harm, no foul. It's not like children are the future or anything.
There you go.